This issue about blue carbon is relatively new issue, but the growth of initiative and network among stakeholders has gained momentum. Indonesia and other blue carbon countries need to join together to share their challenges and opportunities through various partnerships on this subject. And committed groups include International Partnership for Blue Carbon Scientific Initiative, Indian Ocean Rim Association, and Coral Triangle Center. Such a huge wave of momentum driven by common agenda can only help to further blue carbon research and result in strong collaboration. And as a facilitator for International Initiative Subplenary, please welcome Mr. Daniel Murdiaso from CIFOR NIP. Thank you. Please welcome.
Thank you very much, Prita. Selamat pagi, Ibu Bapak sekalian. The next session I would like to invite 5 speakers, including Professor Emil Salim. Can you come up to the stage, Emil? And then I would like to welcome Emily Pigeon from Conservation International. Lucy Wallington from Australian government with the International Partnership for Blue Carbon. And then Mr. Andre Siregar from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Republic of Indonesia. And lastly, Rili Juhani from Center for Coral Triangle Center. Please take your seat. Then I need my notes there. Thank you. So today's session called International Initiative. The objective really is to try to learn what the international initiative and partnership can benefit Indonesia. And we are very fortunate to have distinguished speaker here who's been running a lot of partnership in many different places and many different aspects, mainly on environmental issues. And today we would like to learn the experience from this initiative in the context of blue carbon. So everybody knows who Pak Emil is, but what you might not know is that he is the founder of Yayasan Kehati, one of our sponsors today. Kehati was founded by Pak Emil about, 20 years ago and sustained until now. And we would like to learn how Kehati was found and established and developed and survived until now, and been generating a lot of good things in Indonesia. And then the next speaker, Emily, is the chair for the International Partnership for Blue Carbon, but also the director of international issues related to marine resources in CI, the senior director for that aspect. And Lucy is chairing the finance focal group of the International Partnership for Blue Carbon. So we want to hear how funding is an issue, how funding is a problem, or funding is a blessing for us, and how can we generate funding for blue carbon. Andre Siregar, but Andre is a diplomat. He's been working a lot on humanitarian issues, including the tsunami in Aceh. And very recently he's involved in the IORA, the Indian Ocean Rim Association. So it's like ASEAN which is in the Southeast Asia region, but IORA is in the Indian Ocean. So covering a lot of countries, but facing toward Indian Ocean. So we would like to hear how IORA will bring this issue of blue carbon with neighboring countries, and especially for the benefit of Indonesian interests, as well as a role to play in the region. Really, this is an NGO type of organization, but doing a lot of capacity building with the coral issues. CTC is based in Bali. Of course, she is a diver. So we would like to hear how capacity building is run in the blue carbon arena, and how that can be learned from a blue carbon perspective. So without further ado, Pak Emil, we would like to hear your success story and lesson that we can learn in the process of establishing Kehati.
Thank you. The time was June 1992, Rio de Janeiro, conference on environment, on sustainable development, in which the discussion was heated among United States and the developing country. United States was not so cooperative in terms of supporting the climate change and the Biodiversity Convention. During that heated debate, President George Bush invited a few of the developing countries to have a lunch with him. Of course, the lunch went with a heated debate on the table, attacking President George Bush of not taking active part in promoting U.S. government to support the Biodiversity and the Climate Change Convention. After that heated debate, the lunch was over. George Bush asked me, and in a private talk, and he told me, in principle, personally, as person, George Bush, senior, not the junior, the senior, support your idea on Convention on Climate Change and Biodiversity. But I'm tied my hand as a president, my hands are tied because the Congress is against it. So as a president, I cannot support. But as a person, I will support you. And I will grant you assistance for this. Of course, politics is always polite. So I said thank you, and we left. 93, my assignment as minister was over. Suddenly I got a call in September from President Suharto telling me that President George Bush has sent $16.5 million to support an NGO and asked that the specific NGO must be on biodiversity. President Suharto remembered the discussion in Rio and asked me to establish this Kehati Foundation, Biodiversity Foundation, in Indonesia's the Yayasan Keanekaragaman Hayati, in brief Kehati. And Kehati means to heart, to Kehati. In brief, 6 of us developed the Kehati, and it started at 12th January 1994. It's simple. How we got the $60.5 billion? The idea is how to enlarge this money while promoting efforts by the NGO in the fields of climate change and biodiversity. There are 10 important points that I've learned during that time. Point 1 is that you have to remember that the money must be maintained, the capital as endowment funds, 16.5 billion must be maintained. So you have to partly finance, in rupiah terms, activities, put the emphasis in activity in networking building, build up networking. The rest of the dollar, put it in bonds, investment, in the Indonesian capital market as well as the foreign capital market. So the money is not spent all for projects, but partly for investment and partly for trying to build the capacity, networking capacity of the NGOs. Number two is find out new funds, fresh fund, based on your own capital fund, how to attract others to assist you. And here we obtain assistance for the Tropical Conservation Action Plan in Sumatra and Kalimantan. We got the support obtained from the various companies, among others from the Millennium Challenge Account Indonesia, MCA-1. We have agreed an MCA-1 of a $30 million fund. Furthermore, you build an investment policy that in which then in 20 years you should be able to pass the massive crisis 20 years during 1994 and 2014. We have a heavy, serious financial crisis. During that time, we stick to the dollar and gain the rupiah. We depreciated, we gain rupiah so that less dollar was spent, more for rupiah projects. But the key notion is build network, cooperate, concentrate together in a Tropical Forest Conservation Action Plan, Sumatra. All Sumatra from north to south. Tropical Conservation Action Plan in Kalimantan. Then the Pangan Energy Kesehatan Air, the program. Again, networking together, spread out from north, south Sumatra, north to south Kalimantan, and so on. Build up institutions and then cooperate, don't work alone. Design to program together. Point one. But point two, you must have also ability to mobilize funds. And therefore, in cooperation with the Bursa, we developed the index Sustainable Responsible Investment Kahati Index. It is 25 companies support the idea of the triple bottom line, people, profit, planet. And based on that, 25 companies' bonds are then put in the market under the banner of Sustainable Responsible Investment Kahati, Sri Kahati. Interestingly enough, the public response was favorable. Those the Sri Kahati index companies, the 25 companies, the market went up and they gained higher than the index, Saham Gabungan index. It was a more beneficial effort. The trend index of Sri Kahati during 2013 and 2017 moved up higher. And Sri Sustainable Responsible Investment Index Kahati is higher than the IHS gave. Third, audit laporan keuangan. Be frank. Have a clear-cut audit by established Kantor Accountant Public. Announce this openly. Fourth, have a program that be innovative. The Go to East program is the Bird Hat Seascape of $40 million. The Taman Nasional in Sabangao, $50 million. You have this plan, but attract new investment in this field. So don't touch your endowment fund, but attract through projects, innovative projects, in cooperation with others. And then the key also is that the organizations and NGO with whom you work, you develop what we call barefoot accountants. They are accountants in the field, trained how to keep track on funds spent by all the NGOs cooperating with Kahati. We have 1,200 NGOs working with Kahati in which the barefoot accountants are being trained in financial management, trained in how to get the masyarakat fish, the desa, able to control, to work together, to be transparent, to know what is going on with their money. And with that, we have established now, next year, on 12 January 2019, we are 25 years. And what is the major point that we have learned? 10 points. One is trust building. Build trust. Let the people know, the NGO know, the foreign donors know that you can be trusted. And how is it that don't make use of the money for your personal needs? All our friends working in Kehati are not paid, except the executive director. He is elected through manhunting, headhunting. So you're headhunting, he is competing in the market, he is the best man to elect it, and he's paid well. He and his executive staff is paid well. But all others are not paid. Only the cost of transportation during the meeting 4 times a year. Second is have accountability, full accountability, not only through public account, but accountability in the field. That's why we developed this barefoot accountant. Third, together with that is transparency. Fourth is teamwork. The whole team is working together. We know each other. We try, we have confidence. There is no party politics in it. We have full confidence, and we have idealism. And fifth, the last point is be prudent. Prudent in organizing Kehati. And now, after 24 years, we have now the Kehati, initially 16.5 billion. Now, the 16.5 billion is intact. We have an effort of $20 million program. We have an asset of office building that we have our own. We have rupiah financing of billion rupiah. And we have in the pipeline projects of $40 million, in which we operate our activity without touching the endowment fund. Kehati is an organization which I think could be an example. And what is interesting enough, none of those who are in the poorest are rich people. They all got nothing, only transportation costs during meeting, and only the executive director, the worker, he is paid heavily, paid fully, and work fully, full-time, and he's fully responsible and build up the Kehati. And in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, we have seen Kehati now being already covering 12,000 organizations, millions of people, building projects from Sumatra till Papua. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rainer. Thank you for wrapping up 20 years story in less than 5 minutes, and that's very impressive, especially your conversation with President Bush and how it was fun, and it's very, very unique. Simple questions by Emil. If Blue Carbon is going to establish this kind of fund, do you think NGO will be capable of doing that, or do you suggest that it should be run by NGO or something else?
As a matter of fact, Kehati is already working in the ocean, Blue Ocean Fund. So we are working, already having activity. We are already moving into establishing a Blue Ocean Fund within the context. So we are not only in the field, terrestrial, but also in the ocean. It can be done. The principle is be prudent, honest, no corruption, and fight for projects that satisfy, that meets the need of the people.
So you are saying that Kehati can continue working on this if we are having this new agenda on Blue Carbon?
Yeah. We are planning to continue to move to the Blue Ocean.
Thank you very much. Emily, in the Blue Carbon Initiative, is there anything similar in terms of fundraising? Or I know you are working a lot with both scientists and policy community. How do you see in terms of funding and continuity, sustainability of initiative like BCI, Blue Carbon Initiative?
So for those of you who don't know, the Blue Carbon Initiative was started about 10 years ago now. It was started by a collaboration between Conservation International, IUCN, and the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, which is part of UNESCO. And 10 years ago, we had a meeting where we brought about 20 scientists from around the world, and I think Park Daniel was there, to ask the question of what is blue carbon. Because the science community has known about blue carbon now for decades. By that point 10 years ago, it was the first time that we as the conservation community thought, well, maybe this was something that we should be paying attention to. Maybe this is something that could be replicated in the same way that we had seen people start to pay attention to dryland forests for their carbon value through the Rio discussion that was just mentioned. And the conclusion from that group of scientists on that very first meeting in a very dark, dingy room in Paris was, yes, there was potentially something there. But there was a lot of work to be done to get from this interesting scientific fact to something that could actually motivate policy to really be fitting into the climate change discussion, to being a mechanism for improving management and conservation of these very special ecosystems. And so getting from where then to here, the Blue Carbon Initiative created two groups, one to concentrate on the science, and that group has met at least every year in between, and Park Daniel has been a very active member of that group. And that science group has really sort of asked the question of what science is needed and how we put it together in a way that really will motivate and really communicate how important these ecosystems are and give policymakers and project developers the knowledge they need to really move forward in different arenas. That includes in the UNFCCC climate discussions that came out of that meeting that was just discussed. It includes on a village level, a community that might want to develop a blue carbon project and get access to funds through carbon markets. And it includes other policy drivers, so offsets and other policy mechanisms. And these things are all very easy to talk about, but the actual mechanics of it require some really solid knowledge. And so that's what that science group was focused on. And that science group has traveled the world together. We've been to Brazil, to Costa Rica, we were just in Spain. This year we're going to China. But one of the very, very early meetings was in Bali. And we've also met in Sulawesi. And the science that was put there together was, I think, key to some of the conversations that we're now having. Now the question is, how have we paid for all this? Is that your question? So up until...
I know the process of getting the scientists together is quite a hectic process, but at least you are sure that there are resources that you can expect so that these working scientists really are going to be there timely with ideas and new kind of things that we can share in there. So how do you secure this funding and resources to get them together?
So the funding for the science group has been through two basic mechanisms. One, a lot of private foundations, many of them based either from Europe or the US, have given us the funds to bring those groups together, and then also the policy group has been very active.
Right.
But then NASA, which is the US science agency, has also funded the group. because it's very interested in seeing the remote sensing that it produces used. And so it sees this as a future use, a future important mechanism for people actually using the science that it produces. Similarly, we've, through the Blue Carbon Initiative more recently, we've been working in Colombia, in Ecuador, in Indonesia, in Costa Rica, on actually developing projects on the ground that then connect up.
Yeah, that's my next questions. How far and to what extent can you outreach national or subnational government?
So I think that the lesson that we've had is that, and it's something that we learn over and over again, is that the science cannot exist in a vacuum. That the policy has to be very much integrated with the science from day one. And I'll tell a story from the science working group to illustrate this. So I know many of you in this audience who work on mangroves might know a good friend of mine. Her name is Catherine Lovelock. She's a professor at the University of Queensland. And early on in the science working group, there was a conversation that went on for about 2 years where the science group would say, we have enough data to be able to tell you about blue carbon, you can do blue carbon in policy. And then the policy people would say, you don't have enough data. And we went go around in circles, science saying we have enough data, the policy people saying you don't have enough data. And it got quite boring, this conversation. But suddenly there was a moment where we all realized that we were having two separate conversations. The science community had measured the carbon in these beautiful, pristine mangroves, seagrasses and tidal marshes. The policy community didn't really care about that. What they wanted to know was what was the change if you changed a pristine ecosystem to a degraded ecosystem. What was the emissions? Because that was what the climate change discussion was. And there was no data on that. There was simply no measurements in degraded ecosystems, whether it be a shrimp pond that had been once a mangrove or an agricultural land or an area that had been drained. There was just exactly zero measurements. Right. Except for my friend Kath Lovelock, who's a very good, strong Australian woman, had one measurement she had made in a degraded ecosystem as a result of being very angry one day when she'd found her favourite mangrove had been knocked over. So there's two morals of the story. First of all, do not annoy Australian women. Second one is that you never know what's going to be important, because then Kath published that science within a few months of us having that meeting and discovering that. And that was the first published measurements, the first really scientifically validated measurements of the emissions from converting a mangrove to a shrimp pond. And since then, Daniel and many of the scientists in this room have sent their students out to go and make these measurements all over the world, many of it here in Indonesia. And that science is fundamental to how countries are going to be accounting for their emissions into the future. So that, I think, really speaks to that science conversation. I don't know if I'm answering your question here, but in terms of funding that, it's been very scrappy up until now. It's been donations from private foundations, from private individuals, and for a little bit of money from some of the science institutions in the US. And I think this is why the next speaker, Lucy, is so important, is because I think the International Partnership for Blue Carbon, which Indonesia is a member, is really the next step. It's the place where we can institutionalize this and really leverage some of these larger funding sources.
Before I go to Lucy, one more question, Emily. Given the size and scale and problems of Indonesia with 3.1 million hectares of blue carbon ecosystem, how do you see it in terms of moving forwards for Indonesia, both scientific and policy community?
So I think the lesson that I see over and over again from the village scale to the national scale to the international scale is blue carbon is the subject, the discipline that really requires us to work together and to also to abandon preconceived ideas of who does what. Okay. And so traditionally it is a marine ecosystem, it is a carbon ecosystem, it's a forest ecosystem. And traditionally all three of those things, whether you're talking about science, whether you're talking about the government, whether you're talking about NGOs, we all split those things into different things. I know my institution, Conservation International, we've had forest people and carbon people and marine people, and often we don't even know who each other are. And I've seen that reflected in governments, I've seen that reflected in academic institutions. But the reason, places where we've made real success on blue carbon is when people from all of those disciplines have decided to work together and to learn to speak a common language. And it takes work and it takes commitment and it takes an ability to be open to others. And it's hard. I know because I've gone through this myself within my institution, and I've seen, you know, I've tried to support others in institutions around the world. But I know that if and when you do it, it can be transformational. And I get one just quick example is the country of Costa Rica is just about to integrate mangroves into its national payment for ecosystem services program, which will then feed up through its NDC to its commitments to Paris. And it's taken a lot of work for the forest community there to accept this system. But now we're moving. It's going to be a huge benefit for the mangrove systems in that very important country. So it's possible, but it requires the different ministries, the different NGOs, and the different scientists to openly accept that they have to work with people from different elements of different components.
And that's common in every country. So.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Emily. And Lucy, not many people knows what IPBC is. Can you spare a few minutes to talk about what IPBC is all about?
Yes, absolutely. So firstly, to introduce myself again, I'm from the Australian Government Department of the Environment and Energy in our international climate change area. So my team negotiates on the Paris Agreement and United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change negotiations, but we also coordinate the International Partnership for Blue Carbon. So two related and very important roles that I move between. The partnership was established at the Paris Climate Change Conference in 2016. And Paris was a really important time for blue carbon because, as Emily has described, the research community had been doing a lot of really important work for about, well, more than 2 decades maybe. The conservation community had come into the game about a decade before, but governments at the international level were only starting to pay attention to this thing called blue carbon. So Australia established the partnership behind the momentum of Paris and recognising the need to facilitate knowledge sharing and raise awareness of blue carbon for climate action and the wealth of other important ecosystem services that these coastal ecosystems provide. The partnership has grown since 2016 to 35 members. Indonesia was a founding partner, as was CIFOR, and CIFOR hosted our very first workshop back in 2017. So we have a very strong relationship with Indonesia through the partnership. But also the United States was a founding partner, France, Korea, Costa Rica, Papua New Guinea, Sierra Leone, Seychelles, Somalia. So we have this really eclectic mix of countries around the world that have a lot of blue carbon ecosystems and are interested in collaborating with others to share lessons, to raise awareness, and to see what we can do to accelerate practical action to protect and restore coastal blue carbon ecosystems. So what do we do? Well, we raise awareness at high-level events. So we hold side events at the COPs, the UNFCCC Conference of the Parties. We've also had events at SDG 14, the Ocean Conference, our Ocean Conference, and we've held regional workshops to facilitate knowledge sharing and raise awareness in priority blue carbon regions. That's included through the Coral Triangle Initiative last year, which Indonesia attended along with the other 5 Coral Triangle countries, and which was a really important moment for lesson sharing and for identifying particular regional needs and similarities and differences between the countries in that region that could be shared to enhance experience sharing. And there's been some great outcomes out of that activity, including a learning module, which I'll let really discuss a little later on. Also with the Indian Ocean Rim Association this year in March, so we were able to access the 28 countries of the Indian Ocean Rim Association with this core unifying interest of blue carbon. So that was a really positive activity. We also have 3 focal groups that bring together experts and policymakers to discuss key challenges. So they're grouped into tools and methods, governance and linkages, and finance. And the finance focal group, which I chair, is discussing some of the key risks and barriers to accessing finance for blue carbon activities. I think Pak Emil has given such an interesting case study, and these are the exactly the types of stories that we hope to share through the partnership. So I'd love to actually get that story written down and share it more widely. But some of the key themes that Pak Emil highlighted, networking, financial safeguards, identifying innovative finance, scale, bundling, all these key terms, and equally I think our finance session yesterday highlighted some really interesting case studies. These are exactly the key issues that we're discussing, debating, and wanting to produce some guidance or some information that can help governments in particular, but also NGOs and research organisations to progress work. I should have said, I listed all the countries because I guess that's a particular theme of this session, but our NGO and intergovernmental and research membership is also very, very strong, and I think the contributions of those sectors to the partnership has been invaluable in terms of the expertise and the knowledge that they bring. Conservation International and the Blue Carbon Initiative has been a core partner, as has CIFOR. We also have several research institutions, regional intergovernmental agencies who are able to bring quite diverse project and policy perspectives that inform our work.
You have a very strategic place there as a chair of the IPBC Finance Focal Group. If IPBC wants to, or maybe government of certain country have monies to run the program or project that you are thinking about, for example, is Australia put money there and want to do something in Indonesia, who do you think would be, in terms of transparency and this kind of criteria, would be the best place to put the money to get the work done?
I think that's really a question for you, Daniel, for your colleagues in Indonesia here. I think at the end of the day, it has to be a country-led activity, and it's so dependent on national circumstances. Mm-hmm. I think essentially it's probably going to be collaboration. So you're probably going to need the research sectors giving their expertise, the conservation sector having an important role in implementing, but particularly I think governments, and as is the case in Australia, can have a very important coordination role and can have oversight over what's happening across the landscape and across the country and find out where the hotspots are. Hotspots can be interpreted in a number of ways. It might be the areas that are currently of the greatest value, so should continue to be protected, or it may be areas that are at greatest risk, so are most urgent. And really, I think that needs a careful assessment. Mm-hmm. And again, all of the key principles that Pak Emil lined out would need to be assessed.
Right. Network. Yeah. So, more specific question: if something has to be implemented at national level with respect to the other group in the partnership, what would be the most crucial and near-term kind of thing to do in the process?
Well, I guess, are you wondering about project versus policy approaches?
Right.
I guess I bring the experience of the Australian government and our efforts to implement the IPCC guidance on wetlands inventories. Mm-hmm. Really robust measurement, reporting and verification for national inventories is a really important way to set directions and set priorities and to gather data to inform policy decision making and also to inform tracking towards international commitments such as NDCs. So I think as a first principle, having nested and coherent accounting systems mm-hmm. at the national level is a priority. I think after that, well, what the partnership focuses on and our collaboration and facilitation of knowledge sharing, there's so many important lessons that can be drawn from other countries as to policy approaches, also financing schemes and project experiences. So I'd say that really prioritizing what the country need is with the relevant actors is important.
Yeah, I think yesterday colleagues from Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fishery mentioned about the guidelines to do the accounting. So that's something that we can perhaps start from. But Andre, IORA, this is a new thing. Even for me, when I got encountered with IORA, it's a new society that we never heard about. Can you describe what is it briefly?
Thank you very much, Pak Daniel. And first of all, let me congratulate you and the organizers of hosting this special event. But a privilege to be sitting next to my mentor, Bapak Emil, and also I just came back from Darwin as the consul in Darwin about 6 months ago, and I'm now dealing with regional issues, and I'm blessed to address issues like IORA, CTI, all these blue economy elements which I'm also learning from. I'm sure Bapak Emil Salim is familiar. So, but I want to congratulate all of you here today because as I was listening to Pak Emil Salim's presentation and also Bapak Luhut Panjaitan's presentation, the one thing that I think Emily reminded us is that we need a lot of collaboration and coordination. The governments are doing all that it can. And as I listened to Pak Emil Salim, he's done so much. But you folks here, if you've been here for 2 days, I congratulate you. And you should be given a hand for your participation. But from my perspective as the government, we're looking for the blue economy warriors here, or what do you call it in Lord of the Rings? Those people that traverse the seas to bridge together collaboration. That's what we're looking for. And Indonesia being the biggest maritime nation, I feel in the past 6 months that the government has done so much, and yet it feels like we've got this fishnet into the sea, and we just can't get enough traction to get all the stakeholders involved. And like also Lucy mentioned, governments are doing its best in funding and collaboration, but of Indonesia, we really need to do something different. I think the underlying idea of a maritime culture needs to be reviewed. A maritime civilization needs to be enforced. So when you ask me about IORA, IORA is a beautiful organization, actually. We shared it last year. Actually, Indonesia, it was established in 1997 for various reasons, not only for geographical collaboration, trade. I can read you a lot of background information about IORA, but let me tell you the gist of it. Indonesia in 2015 with Australia, we managed to raise the portfolio of IORA as a strategic geopolitical issue. Not only for more strategic issues and also trade, but also realizing that the Indian Ocean is probably the last frontier where we need to really engage. IORA, you probably might know, Indian Ocean Rim has 22 countries. 1/3 of them are LDCs, so you know what that means. Whenever we involve them, they need support. And unlike ASEAN or APEC, I'm also dealing with APEC. APEC is the top 80% of world economies, so it's a different discussion there. But when you talk about IORA, we've got a lot of activities in the maritime element, and yet how do we engage these regions, these countries in the rim which have minimal infrastructure, a lot of political motivation, and yet they need to develop their basic involvement abilities. So just quickly, but I know I'm only given 5 minutes to speak, and if I'm online, this is very exciting for me to be online, to be seen, but so I'm rushing through all my notes, and but I suppose I can tell you that IORA itself, since 2015, we've managed to have a few declarations on the blue economy. We've managed to have many, many meetings since then, and in 2017, this year, we had our second ministerial meeting on the blue economy. Again, a lot of political support, but who are the real actors? Indonesia has only had Pak Luhut Panjaitan, or the Coordinating Ministry for Maritime Affairs, for the past almost 4 years now, after Jokowi's brilliant global maritime fulcrum. But maybe we'll learn from the Australians. I mean, like being a massive continent state, they have a strong maritime presence. Whereas for Indonesia, we hold 80% of world trade shipping, and yet most of our people don't realize that. Do we have a cultural shift that we have to pursue? So that's my introduction by Daniel. I'm imagining there'll be some discussions on what you want us to know about IORA. But let me just, before I conclude, the Jakarta Declaration for the Blue Economy, indeed, in 2017, we want to, of course, promote sustainable management and protection of marine and coastal ecosystems. We want to promote financing and ocean economy. We want to promote local wisdom and traditional knowledge. Of course, promote public-private partnerships and adopt new ways to address legal fishing and IUU fishing, and encourage more dialogue among IORA states. So probably this would be a good chance to ask me, and maybe ask my colleague from Canberra here, what does that all really mean when we try to engage the 22 countries who's facing basic poverty issues? Here comes Indonesia. We have so much maritime territory, and yet, thank God for Minister Luhut that we're focusing now on preventing ocean garbage. But the truth of it is, that's only the, what's the word probably, the tip of the iceberg. Are we really ready to engage the NGOs? Are the NGOs really able to see what will be the first 5-year priorities? And with Salim's involvement here, I'm hopeful that we'll have enough momentum to get all the government institutions involved. This year, we'll be having about 5 maritime events. We've got the OOC, we've got the Indo-Pacific Maritime Dialogue, we've got IORA, we've got also other, we're having something called the Indian Archipelagic and Island State Conference. So we have a lot of political momentum, but it's up to all of you here to tell us what would be the first priority.
Thank you, Andre. How do you see blue carbon in this context? Do you have in your portfolio, bigger portfolio of blue economy, blue carbon is part of the equation?
Indeed, the blue economy has always been our discussion since APEC in 2012, yeah? But like maybe Pak Emil might know, we've had many core group discussions and workshops promoting fisheries and aquaculture, maritime safety, not only amongst IORA countries. In Bali, we've had the Indian Ocean region workshops. So a lot of elements here. But at the end of the day, how do we translate not only the blue carbon, but the blue economy? We've got a lot of jargon here, Lucy. Yeah? I mean, like, how do we get people to think in a maritime perspective? How do we get people to appreciate that at the end of the day, we know what needs to be done before the election years? And so these are incremental elements that we're trying to pursue. Maybe with CIFOR as a corporation, we can do something. But at this point, there's a lot of workshop and seminars. But probably we'll work closer with our partner countries in IORA, especially Australia.
Thank you. So from politics, policy, network, and then inter or intra-countries connection, we want to hear from practical, on-the-ground point of view, and would like to hear from really, as one of the example, how knowledge and skill are conveyed to the community, and would like to hear from you really about how CTC, the Coral Triangle Center, is dealing with capacity and development and also working with stakeholders.
Thank you, Pa Daniel, and I'd like to echo Pa Andre to congratulate you with this great seminar and very exciting topic like blue carbon. And also, Pa Emil, we learned a lot from you in the last few decades, so it's an honor to be with you here in the panel. I'd just like to emphasize in this panel also the need for capacity building and outreach. We talk a lot about regional, global collaboration, coordination is required, particularly in this context. But the key building stone, the building block for that is really about aligning expectations, capacity, and also knowledge and skills. And we've learned a lot from the Coral Triangle Initiative. We've been very much involved with that from the start, also when I worked for the Nature Conservancy at the time. The roadmap leading up to that regional collaboration with the 6 countries that harbor the most diverse ecosystems in the world when it comes to coral reefs, mangroves, seagrass beds, had a lot to do with building awareness and capacity at all levels in government, but also a wider range of stakeholders. And I think we learned from there that the need for a dedicated approach for capacity building to bring all governments and other stakeholders up to speed on the approaches, strategies, opportunities to collaborate together is critical. And all 6 countries prioritized capacity building as a #1 priority to implement the regional plan of action that was signed off by the 6 head of states in 2009 in Manado. So the countries include Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia, East Timor, Papua New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands. So in 2010, we established the Coral Triangle Center with the mission to build up local capacity for long-term marine conservation and really try to transform science, the latest science, into manageable information for a range of stakeholders in the region. And I'm very glad Pa Hashim Jalal just walked in. He's one of the founding members together with George Tahia and a number of other people. So the CTC, the Coral Triangle, is focused on developing very practical training modules to advance, in this context, a regional plan of action, but it relates very much to the protection of those very important marine and coastal ecosystems with the approach of marine protected areas, seascapes, but also look at sustainable fisheries, climate change adaptation, and the protection of endangered species. And we see that also the development of the MPA's marine protected area approach. Originally, decades ago, it was all about protection of biodiversity, and more efforts are taken now to design and manage MPAs also for objectives of sustainable fisheries and climate change adaptation. And in that process, I think we learned a lot about how we can train people, but also foster, facilitate collaboration and coordination cross-sectoral. And one of the things we do is also setting up learning networks or community of practices among local governments across the Coral Triangle. A lot of the, they are at the coal phase of conservation where decisions are made, investments are cleared. And we like to really support governors, mayors and their offices to take more informed decisions how to protect the very valuable coastal and marine ecosystems. Another key aspect of this is also the empowerment of women leaders. They are also critical across the region to advance protection of coastal and marine ecosystems, but also engage villages very effectively in managing those resources. So we also thought that we need to be much more innovative and much more participatory in designing and implementing training and outreach programs. So one of the things we do is developing the Center for Marine Conservation in Bali, where we also develop more innovative training approaches. One of the things we've done is to build an escape room. Escape room is, they may not be so popular yet here in Asia, but very popular in Europe and the US, where you go in with 6 to 8 people and you have to resolve puzzles to get out of a space, usually in 1 or 2 hours. And we build an escape room to save the coral reefs in 1 hour. And in 1 hour, you have to work together, you have to lead a team, you have to demonstrate commitment, you have to be able to ask for help to get out of the space. And in the process, people learn a lot about, in this case, coral reef conservation, the life forms, diversity, the threats, but also the solutions. And we're building a second one with support from Maersk Shipping. The shipping companies are also very interested to support marine conservation at this stage. And this one will be on the plastic soup. So how to endorse the key messages and approaches that Pa Luhut also just mentioned this morning about refusing, reducing, recycling, reusing plastics. And I can imagine we may want to build an escape room on blue carbon, how you can actually bring this concept more closer to the people who have to work with this. So escape rooms are now an integral part of our training programs for policy decision makers, for the hospitality industry, corporate retreats, school teachers. So these are effective means to really immerse people more in what it actually means in terms of concepts. As I've heard many times in this conference, there's so much jargon, so many new concepts and approaches, and it's really key to spend more time in how we communicate about this. So I think there's a lot of scope to work on terminology, definitions, and operationalize that for the policy and decision makers. And I'm very happy we now work with the Australian government, with Lucy and her team, and the CTI team, to develop a blue carbon training module. And this is a module for policy officers and middle managers, particularly from the Ministry of Forestry and Environment, Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fisheries, Bappenas, the Indonesian National Planning Bureau, or Coordinating Ministry of Maritime Maritime Affairs, provinces and regional district government levels. So we try to invite members, participants from different sectors, but also from the national, provincial and district government to really engage and participate in this training module. As a fact, we were just developing this with the help of regional experts. Ben Brown is here in the audience. He's a mangrove expert and also a scholar and PhD candidate at the Durham University, who brings a lot of expertise also in mangrove conservation and restoration. And we also work with Dr. Miguel Fortes from the Philippines, who is a seagrass specialist, but also more recently works on blue carbon. So those two experts with our team are currently developing this training module. We will implement this in August this year, and this will be available also for other government institutions to be institutionalized, with the aim also to really help other countries in the Coral Triangle to learn more about blue carbon, and particularly how to implement this in a policy context, but also for management strategies. And maybe just very quickly, the objectives, there are four from this particular carbon training module. Include the understanding of the role of blue carbon in climate change mitigation and adaptation, and achieve climate change goals and targets. Secondly, build capacity to measure, report and verify the MRV blue carbon and identify pathways for its inclusion in national greenhouse gas inventories. Thirdly, understand the potential for blue carbon to be included in voluntary and regulated carbon markets now and in the future, including the main policy and science challenges, complexities. And lastly, identify nationally relevant opportunities presented by blue carbon as an approach to incentivize improved coastal ecosystem management for multiple benefits. And we will bring the participants to Nusa Penida. This is a marine protected area offshore Bali, about half an hour from the mainland of Bali, which is an excellent training ground to learn more about MPAs, but also in the context of blue economy. It has mangrove seagrass beds, but also a very active tourism industry that we can also engage in some of these solutions we are looking for. So we're very excited about it, and we are happy to keep you informed about the development of this module. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I have the impression that you are not only working on coral, but also looking at the entire blue carbon ecosystem, coral, seagrass, and mangrove as a continuum. Thank you very much. So we've been listening all this initiative on the ground and being thought and have plans, etc., which very much involving Indonesia. So I would like to provoke the audience to ask questions. What is this all about, and compare in the context of our day-to-day work. So if you have any concern or ideas or questions, how we move forward from here, please do so. So if anybody can help with the microphone. Yes, please, Riris and Ben, and then from that side, Novi, is it? Yeah. Novi first, and then Ben. Any other one in the middle? Pak Joko and Pak Bambang. First four. Wow.
Selamat pagi, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Pak Daniel. My name is Novi Adi. I'm from Marine Research Center one of the research unit of the Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fisheries in Indonesia. So it's been a pleasure to be here, meeting what's so-called as carbon people, Pak Daniel, Emily, Lucy. Nice meeting you all here again. So I will just have comments and probably just quick questions. So first, I would like to comment what Emily mentions about she said about science and policy aspects of the blue carbon. So basically, I agree what she mentions that we need to go further to implement or to integrate science into policies. Meaning, I mean, the science part is enough. I mean, for the science, actually, the sky is the limit. There's no limit for that. But what I meant enough is to integrate or to formulate it into working policy. We have enough science for that. And in line with what Daniel mentioned, who would be the most suitable institutions or sector to implement these blue carbon related matters? So I would say that the government of Indonesia should take role on this. And because I'm under the research unit of the governmental sector, so I'm trying to think like a government employee, that we like about regulations, we like about law, formal law. So if we want to move or we want to develop a certain projects, we usually questions about the underlying law, the regulation related to this particular aspect, for example, blue carbon. And in my opinion, this blue carbon related matter is not yet integrated into an explicit law in Indonesia. So in my opinion, there are some potential regulation or law that we can try to integrate blue carbon into. For example, the Indonesia NDZ. And the second one is the law that regulate the greenhouse gas inventory. So this greenhouse gas inventory law was established in 2011 as a part of the Indonesian ratification over the UNFCCC. But I heard that this law is now under development, under review, which I heard that there is a good chance that blue carbon will be included. But it's not really clear whether it will be included in one sector or there will be an additional sector of the existing 5 sectors. So, and in my opinion, it will be an advantage for blue carbon if this coastal and marine sector or blue carbon sector is explicitly included in the Indonesian law or regulation on climate change.
Okay,
yeah.
we got your point, and
yeah.
our speaker here will comment on that. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ben?
Thank you. Ben Brown from Charles Darwin University and Yayasan Hutan Biru, or Blue Forest. I'll make this succinct if I can. Yesterday we heard a recommendation from Ibu Tuti about maybe making a restoration agency for mangroves analogous to the peatland restoration agency. And she also presented some targets from a law in 2017 or regulation where Indonesia is committed to restore mangroves, I think 200,000 hectares in the next medium-term national plan and 2 million hectares by 2045. So I'm curious from anyone in the panel what your thoughts are in terms of creating a new agency for, specifically on mangrove restoration, and the pluses, maybe the pluses and minuses from a coordination aspect or other aspects that such a concept might have. Because I think it's interesting, and I'd like to hear from the panel their views. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ben. The third one was Bambang.
Pak Murtiarso, I have admired very much what all of you have done to investigate the changes, the solid earth-bound activities. Being an astronomer, I'm interested, what does it do to the atmosphere? The atmosphere that surrounds the Earth is very important. And right now, there are 4,000 exoplanets that have been found. None of them are proper and fit to the mankind. But there are new ways to investigate exoplanets that is looking for the change in the atmosphere, whether the atmosphere of the exoplanet, some of the exoplanets, in particular those of the Earth-like atmosphere, changes in time or not. The change in time is anticipated because of the change in the ground. Now, you have done it very well on the ground. I'm interested in what happened to the atmosphere of our planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak Bambang. I don't know who can answer that, but Pak Joko, your chance.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm just raising some issue. As we all know, Indonesia needs about 1 million barrels of fossil fuel a day, and Indonesia at present are not able to supply the fossil fuel, so we have to import the fossil fuel. And if I compare a bottle of water and 1 liter of fossil fuel, it's amazing to see how expensive is a bottle of water, because the fossil fuel, we need drilling, we need refinery, we need tanker, and then somebody here in the audience talking about what called microalgae fuel, which can be converted about 70% of fatty acid. Yeah. So what we need here is someone who have some global thinking about producing, for example, 300,000 liters of biofuel per day. I think the economy will be sufficient, because everybody talking about it's not efficient to convert from microalgae to fuel. But if we think about large scale, yeah, someone with big ideas to convert, to produce biofuel about 300,000 barrels per day, I think the economy can be achieved. So what we need here is, I think, what you call collaboration, that the lady talking there about collaboration to produce some product of blue carbon, and quantity about 100,000 of barrel per day. I think we can solve the problem for what we call fossil fuel with biofuel.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So you have a range of questions from legal institutions up to the technical with regard to climate change and blue carbon, and also fossil fuel related issues. Anybody wants to comment on that? I think a question which are related to your point, Pak Emil, is about the establishment of agency who will take care of restoration of blue carbon ecosystem, especially mangrove. And it's need a body to do that, so that everything will be coordinated there. Is it a plus or a burden?
I feel here, in this effort of the blue ocean, we concentrate, if possible, two-pronged attack. One attack is revival of the local wisdom. If you go to Maluku, to the islands of Maluku or Papua, there is a local wisdom, I forgot the name. SASI, I think, yeah, SASI it's called, yeah, SASI is called, that in a particular period of time, the fishermen are not allowed to fish. They have to stop fishing, allow the coral reefs and the small fish to grow and the mother fish to breed so that the fish can then survive through the law of SASI, protected by ADAT law, with ADAT leaders, local leaders as a system. It works during the period in the past. But now it is being ignored because modern technology is coming and this ADAT law is not being recognized fully. So one attack is how to revive the SASI law in order that the life of in the sea can be sustained, can be preserved. A second attack is for the intellectuals. It's the intellectual that create offshore drilling, technology of oil exploitation, offshore oil exploitation. Recently, we have experienced in East Kalimantan the blow up of the pipes, and it takes some time to solve this. I was wondering the responsibility of the scientists, engineers in this technology which endangered the sea ecosystem, the marine ecosystem. And the question is then how to develop this blue ocean together with the scientific development that can tame the technology when they are exploiting the sea. A third major issue, dear friend, and here I like that this blue ocean will take initiative. Java, the northern coast of Java, from Banten to Surabaya, is sinking. Meanwhile, sea level rise is going up. What is the consequence? That the rivers that the minister has talked this morning cannot flow into the sea and then back up again to the land, and we have flood. Every year there will be flood in the northern part, north coastal area of Java. It needs an engineering solution. And here, a solution that then attack the implication, the consequence of the sea level rise because of climate change. Second, the sinking of the soil in the northern part of Java that is continuing and making it that flood is an every year phenomena. 3 points that I think the blue ocean should then move into direction making use of the local wisdom, SASI law. Second, scientifically development of offshore drilling, offshore development that proves now after so many years to be abandoned. We have abandoned sea drilling area that endangers the possibility of pollution. And the third is the sinking of northern part of Java. How to cope with this so that by the year 2045, Java will still be intact. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comment or? Anything?
So for Ben's question, I think I don't pretend to know enough about Indonesian government structures to be able to comment on that specifically, on the creation of a new agency for restoration. I do think having an agency that can focus on it, given the need in Indonesia, is probably worthwhile, assuming it's resourced properly and assuming that it can do what I was talking about before, network and integrate well with all the other agencies that are responsible for related activities, whether it be greenhouse gas inventories, whether it be coastal management through marine affairs and fisheries, whether it be the forestry group. So assuming it works well, then I can see value to that. What was the other question I had? The biofuels. So blue carbon, as we have defined it, is very much focused on the ecosystems that contribute directly to removing CO2 and other greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, or the degradation or destruction of those ecosystems results in emissions into the atmosphere. And then we built this particularly learning from the terrestrial forest community. So there's been a lot of work terrestrially on RED and things and related mechanisms that look at how these natural ecosystems are important to addressing climate change. Now, I think biofuels are, as was described by the gentleman who asked the question, are an emerging, very important piece of the climate change solution, but they fit into a different piece of the climate change discussion. So in some ways they are blue carbon. It's carbon from the ocean, but it's not what we're talking about in this arena. It fits more into the sort of the energy, perhaps transportation piece of the climate change discussion, whereas this is really more under the land use, if you're looking at the more traditional sectors that people talk about. So I do appreciate that that's a little bit confusing, but I think it's a very valid and important piece of the climate change discussion. It's just not what we've been focusing on here.
So Lucy, this is beyond IPBC, but it's interesting to note the name of your organization or your ministry is Energy and Environment. So how do you see this?
Yeah, well, that was a move that Australia made 18 months ago to bring the environment and energy portfolios together, recognising the importance for those two sectors to be discussing closely, especially on climate action, but on economy and other issues. But to just build on Emily's response in terms of how we're defining blue carbon, as I said, Paris was a really important moment for raising its profile, not just because of the momentum and the global interest in Paris, but actually because for the first time, the Paris Agreement actively calls on countries to protect and restore coastal ecosystems as carbon sinks and sources, as well as the other terrestrial and marine ecosystems. So while the United Nations Framework Convention text had recognized those systems as having a role, the Paris Agreement actively called on parties to protect and restore them. So that's where the momentum and interest has come from. I think over the past 3 years, governments have been maturing our policy thinking around blue carbon, and I think when that's really well established, we'll be able to look more closely at the linkages to other questions of energy, transportation, atmospheric questions. Although I know under the research and systematic observation item of the UNFCCC negotiations, the atmospheric and ocean questions are linked and are being addressed in great depth. So I'd encourage you to look at the resources in that sector which are available online. I think the questions from Novi and from Ben are really important policy questions, and I'm really curious to see what the next steps will be out of the Indonesia Blue Carbon Strategy Framework that's been presented yesterday. One resource I can recommend is a Blue Carbon National Policy Assessment Framework and Tool that was published by IUCN in 2015 or 16. It's literally a spreadsheet. We all love a spreadsheet. I know there's a lot of researchers in the room. But it can help countries to step through their current policy settings and identify whether new or expanded settings are necessary, whether regulation is the best next step, or whether there might actually be an opportunity within existing policy frameworks to advance blue carbon without cluttering the policy space or the governance space, so it can help to prioritise and identify. Certainly in Australia's case, we've got quite a multifaceted approach to protecting our coastal ecosystems. That includes legislation through the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, which lists matters of particular national significance in the environment, and there's 2 seagrass ecosystems included. But also the Emissions Reduction Fund, which credits projects that have demonstrated emissions reductions. And then our work on implementing the IPCC wetland supplement to better account for blue carbon ecosystems. Yeah.
Thank you. But Daniel, I'm a diplomat here, so I'm expected to know all these questions. But I learned a lot from what you've mentioned. I listened attentively regarding the important nature for Indonesia to have legislation or regulations that incorporate not only climate change but also blue carbon. And also I take note of Ben's comment regarding is it time for us to have a mangrove institution? I'm sure people really might have some views, but yesterday an important event took place, which was Cristiano Ronaldo was accepted into Juventus for 1,100 million euros. A few years ago, he was here in Bali as the ambassador for mangroves in Indonesia. So I'm sure that, Ben, we might find a way to reactivate that initiative. I can probably support from an Asia-Pacific perspective, because for us, we don't only deal with IORA, but also CTI and also and also work closely with our partners in the Pacific. But I think on that subject, the awareness needs to be maintained, Ben, and unfortunately Indonesians enjoy politics a bit too much, and as our minister mentioned earlier, if we're too busy talking about politics, we forget what's really important to address, and this is, blue carbon is one of them, noting that Indonesia is a maritime nation. Bambang, I noticed your comments regarding how it affects the atmosphere. Right now we're also discussing this at the United Nations on how it has impacts on as mentioned by Lucy, not only through the Paris discussions, but also how our negotiators in the UN are trying to correlate that one. Because at this point, even through CTI, there are carbon emissions affected by what's happening at sea, and affecting also those island provinces that Indonesia needs to manage and to engage. I think one of the challenges in that light, Bapa, is if we can get the provincial governments to also be familiar with carbon, and for them to also play a part and not only be active in following what the national government is doing, but for them to actually bring their own sectoral approaches and provincial approaches. Pak Joko, regarding oil, reports have stated that Indonesia will run out of oil in the next 3 years anyway, so that's going to be another economic problem that we have to face. But I think what you're suggesting on the microalgae fluids is something that we need probably to explore, but more importantly, we need people to be aware of how we can mainstream that alternate energy sources. I think this one final thing, if I may convey, is that there's geopolitics in everything here. And Australia and Indonesia played an active role through IORA for a reason. We saw there's a lot of resources there that we need to work together to manage. The Indian Ocean is one area where many countries are still very modest in their engagement, because simply the resources there are massive, and yet we don't have the technologies to actually take advantage of it. At this point, the government is probably looking at how we manage the eastern region of Indonesia. We have many organizations there like CTI and Southwest Pacific Dialogue, and we have also the BIMPIAGA. These are many initiatives that are probably easy to remember their names, but to have an environmental aspect is something that we need everybody here to remind those negotiators and also government officials to say that it's not just about trade, it's not just about shipping, but technically marine resources need all of our involvement in the discussions. And finally, I'm sensing here that one of the best ways to address these many challenges, both scientific and also economic, not least political, is we engage our neighboring countries the 10 neighboring countries, including Australia, PNG, of course, all those other countries that are bordering with our maritime need to be involved. I have here with me two students from from universities listening to your discussions, the international relations students, but one of them is from Jayapura. I'm really hopeful that once we see the economics of things, we can really find solutions for the scientific challenges. Once the community knows, as mentioned by Luhut, that the cost of this garbage is detrimental not only to the economy but to the ecosystem, then we'll get more involvement and maybe get more NGOs to be involved in this. But at the end of the day, as long as the communities are still hesitant and waiting or finger pointing on who else will solve these problems, I think that will be the big challenge. I'm hopeful, Daniel, that in our discussions here, I'm sure all of us here have our own projects and programs. I'm hopeful that the youths here, they can be the next maritime leaders, the blue carbon leaders. And I really hope that you will examine and you will probably guide the government on what needs to be done, not only nationally, but regionally, so that by then we can talk about the effects of the atmosphere. By then, hopefully, Cristiano Ronaldo will come back to Indonesia and again mention how the mangrove development is much improved. And of course, by then we expect Indonesia and Australia to be even stronger partners to create this blue economy, this blue carbon economy in our region. Thank you.
Really? 1 minute?
Very quickly, maybe 2 remarks. We hope that the blue carbon trading model, and initially will target 25 policy officers and middle management managers from different government agencies to inform and the development of local policies and frameworks for blue carbon. And we hope that this can be replicated in Indonesia, but also in the other countries of the Triangle. And in relation to Ben's question about a separate agency for the restoration of mangroves, maybe an alternative approach could be also more of a task force or a consortium of NGOs such as the Blue Forest, Wetland, International Wetland, Indonesia, Nature Conservancy, who are all working on mangrove restoration projects, could form some kind of alliance to focus, accelerate and strengthen mangrove restoration projects in Indonesia. A new agency, I'm always a bit hesitant because of the time it will take, resources. It may also stifle actually the process versus a more informal approach, yet very effective. And we did some of those task forces alliances in the CTI context that worked very well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've been taking all the coffee time, but we started very late this morning, and I think we just shift the coffee time after this, and I believe with the announcer how to manage the time. But thank you very much for your contribution and thought for this summit. It's been very useful. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for facilitating, Professor Daniel Mudiarso. Thank you for the speakers, Pak Emil Salim, Ms. Emily Pijon, Ms. Lucy Wallington, Pak Andre Omer Siregar, dan Ibu Rili Johani. Thank you so much. Please be seated. Oh, we will take a picture together to memorize this moment. Would you like to come forward? Yeah. Big smile for blue carbon management in Indonesia. Let's give a big applause for this session. Participants, thank you so much. Thank you. You may be seated. And to all participants, because we have a limited time, so we just straight continue to the parallel discussion forum. While parallel discussion forum will be in the 4th floor and 2nd floor. 4th floor is about hydrogeomorphic effect of subsea